2024, the fearless year of Shadow the Hedgehog, continues because we just got a ton of cool new info today, and it is a fantastic day to be an early 2000s Sonic fan. So today at Anime Expo, we got a whole panel dedicated to ushering us into a new era of Shadow, as special guests like series director Takashi Iizuka, Kirk Thornton, the current voice of Shadow and has been since the 2010s, and Stephanie Sheh, the new voice actor for Maria, shed some light on the history of Shadow as a character and his significance to the franchise. After kicking things off with an introduction to all of the panelists, they delve deep into Shadow's history, and it begins with this already kind of controversial timeline right here. The timeline shows off most of the games, movies, and comics that Shadow had a major role in, which is really cool of them to include. They start by talking about Shadow's introduction as a rival in Sonic Adventure 2, released all the way back in 2001 initially for the Sega Dreamcast, and then they go on to talk about his next few appearances in Sonic Heroes, and weirdly enough, Sonic Battle. I mean, I just wasn't expecting to see that at all here. So I guess it really does play a much larger role in the overall Sonic lore than I thought. Which granted, the game is jam-packed with a ton of lore, but I just didn't expect them to ever really reference it again, especially as much as they have, and as you'll see later on in this video, it really is important to this prologue. Of course, they had to include Shadow's standalone title, Shadow the Hedgehog, in here, which was great to see. Super controversial, but really important to his character. This timeline is just a little bit weird to me because they omit a lot of key moments in my personal opinion. Most notably, you're gonna notice that Sonic 06 isn't even listed here, which is very odd since out of all the three Hedgehogs in that game, Shadow by far had the best story, and it was also one of his most iconic depictions in the entire franchise. But I guess they're gonna go with the fact that because 06 isn't canon, because it retcons itself at the end of the game, it wasn't worth mentioning. I mean, that would make sense if we at least saw Sonic Forces though. I mean, he had a whole standalone DLC campaign in that game that even motivated the main villain of the game, Infinite. So you would think that that would have been listed off here. Maybe it was the poor reception of that game that made them leave it out, but then again, they have Sonic Boom in here, so I don't really know what made them decide what games were worth mentioning, but I still think the timeline does an overall really good job of letting you know most of his major roles. All of this leads us to this year with his soon-to-be live-action debut in Sonic Movie 3, which I'm really excited for, and his somewhat spiritual successor to Shadow the Hedgehog now, Shadow Generations, which is likely going to be his biggest new chapter in Shadow's lore for the first time in years. Moving on to the next segment of the panel, after talking about his appearances briefly, Iizuka then talks about Shadow's origins, and here we mostly get a recap of a lot of what the hardcore Sonic fans already know about how Shadow was conceived in Sonic Adventure 2, which is that he started out as a character that was meant to rival Sonic, similar to Knuckles and Metal Sonic from the classics, but one that was even more closely like a darker version of Sonic, and later that turned into them wanting him to be much more of an anti-hero rather than simply just being Sonic's rival. What's interesting here is that Iizuka says when they flew out to the US to work on SA2, they were inspired to create Shadow by, at the time, popular anti-hero characters like Spawn, which I was really surprised to hear, because I always thought that, because of how much inspiration the Sonic series has taken from Dragon Ball, that Shadow would have been more directly inspired by, Vegeta. But apparently, according to Iizuka, when asked about that, that's not the case. I feel like Iizuka's probably just messing with us. Then they talk about the inspiration behind Shadow's character design and personality, specifically highlighting this design right here, which the dev team dubbed Terios, which as we all know, is actually now going to be a skin for Shadow in Sonic X Shadow Generations. When asked about why they called him that, Iizuka literally said, and I quote,
I have no idea.
which I just thought was really funny. He's just like, I don't know, man. I mean, why not? They also confirmed that they wanted to go with black and red as Shadow's defining colors, and that was in fact inspired by Kabuki face paint designs, which of course explains his look in the final design. After that, Iizuka was asked about what really separates Shadow from Sonic, and again, it's really more of him just saying that Sonic's more of your average hero, while Shadow's an anti-hero. Sonic's gonna go through your typical lighthearted adventures where he does things because it's the right thing to do, while Shadow's gonna go on these darker adventures and do what he can to protect the ones he loves, such as Maria. And just like I've been saying for so long now, ever since this game was revealed, ever since this whole year started, when Iizuka was asked about, why now? Why are we going through Shadow's history this deeply today? And like I said from the beginning, it was to get people up to speed on Shadow's backstory so they aren't confused when they go in to watch Sonic Movie 3, which will be his biggest appearance this year, since that's going to be seen by more than just Sonic fans, but rather general audiences as a whole. And again, like I said before as well, Sonic Generations was a great way. It was a phenomenal way to introduce people to Sonic the Hedgehog, since you're going through all of his key moments in his history, accompanied by some of the best gameplay in the entire franchise. So Shadow's history would have to be introduced in a game similar to it. So it made perfect sense to bundle them into one package. And of course, after Shadow the Hedgehog's poor reception, I don't think they ever want to risk calling it Shadow the Hedgehog 2 or making another standalone Shadow game. It had to be attached to the Sonic brand for it to truly succeed. And that was pretty much it for Mazuka and Shadow's history, and now it's time to move on to Kirk and Stephanie to talk about the new era. Immediately, Kirk was asked about what new side of Shadow we're going to be seeing in this game, and it was interesting to hear his response here, because this is really the first time that he's voice acting for Shadow in a game that has a whole lot more story that involves him, not just being sidelined like he was in Generations, and really briefly being involved in games like Boom, with the closest he's really got to anything like this being Forces and Shadow's standalone campaign. He talked about how Shadow's usually cool, calm, and collected, and that this game will really test him in ways that we haven't seen before, which I'm pretty excited about. This game as a whole will definitely alter the course of Shadow's history, I think for the better, and I kind of hope that Shadow becomes like an entire spin-off thing in the Sonic franchise, because he's so distinct from Sonic. It'd be like having multiple Spider-Man and Venom games under the same Spider-Man umbrella, I think something like that could really work. Moving on to the new voice actor for Maria, we got a lot of interesting insight into her character as well. The new concept art for the prologue is really cool too. Interesting seeing Maria with a lot more of that Aerith from Final Fantasy hairstyle. They talk a bit about her character and how she's Shadow's driving force and how she balances her emotions during her performance. They also talk about how usually when voice actors record lines, it's like a one and done thing. They go into the studio, get the lines done, and the game just kind of comes out. But what's interesting this time around, either in a good or bad way, it's really too early to tell. They mentioned that they were brought back a lot of times, sometimes 2 to 3 times, because lots of scenes were reworked and so they had to re-record the lines. So hopefully that doesn't mean that the story goes down the route of being super convoluted like a lot of the previous Dark Era games sort of were. I think they should try to keep the story simple as much as possible. Of course, try to keep it as lore heavy as you can, but just do your best to eliminate plot holes and things like that. But again, it's being written by Ian Flynn. I have a lot of faith in Ian Flynn, so I wouldn't be worried. Following all of this, we finally get to the moment we've all been waiting for. We get our first look at one of the 3 episodes of the Dark Beginnings prologue, animated by Studio GigX, who worked on stuff like Rise of the TMNT and Studio Simage, and wow, I'm speechless. If you thought the Sonic Frontiers prologue was cool, this is honestly just mind-blowing. It starts out with a close-up shot of Shadow on the Space Colony Ark explaining to Maria how Professor Gerald created him to be the ultimate life form to cure Maria. Remember when I said Sonic Battle is actually really important? Yeah, well, the infamous GIZOID himself, Emerl, from Sonic Battle breaks out of containment and goes after Gerald Robotnik. Wow. Okay. I could tell you right now, that was the last thing I expected to see today. When Maria holds on to Shadow's hands, we get a really cool glitch effect, and when I was watching this live with the stream chat, I honestly didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know if this was intentional or just like an animation effect, but when you get to that perfect still frame, you can see that it actually is the barrel of a gun pointing down at the screen, and if you look closely, you'll see that the glow is clearly from the goggles that the gun agents had from the infamous Shadow the Hedgehog cutscene where, just play the clip. So I think this was definitely put here to foreshadow that. By the way, the animation is super well done, a lot of 3D for a surprisingly anime-inspired look. The effects and the camera shots were stellar, the music was fantastic, and big props to Kirk and Steph for their performances too. Kirk Thornton's Shadow, I'm not gonna lie, is really starting to grow on me a lot more, and Stephanie's just perfect for this role. Shadow and Emerl then face off in the lab, and that's all we get. Perfect way to establish the lore of this game and what it's gonna lead to. I'm incredibly excited to see how all of this leads up to the events of the game, and I guess we're all gonna have to brush up on that Sonic battle lore because it really seems like it's gonna play a huge role in this game, way larger than I initially thought before today, or ever. I honestly don't think anyone saw that coming. We also get a really good look at this new poster for the animation, and oh my god, is it gorgeous. We got the SA2 rocket in the background, Gerald strapped to the chair, Rouge and Omega return, and Emerl. All phenomenal stuff. Shadow's lore really is some of the best in this franchise, man. Finally, the panel ends with some discussion from some of the animators working at Studio GIGX, which again, massive shout out to them for creating this masterpiece. And they basically just talk about how much fun they had working on it, going through Shadow's extensive lore, and being able to expand upon it. The Q&A segment at the end was mostly a nothing burger, but one of the questions about the Ultimate Life Form got us some hilarious live Azuka reaction memes, so that's awesome. Okay, final thoughts. Overall, great stuff. Let me know your thoughts on all this in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe and drop a like if you enjoyed this video. And of course, remember, I'll be dropping more news, guides, and discussions for the game, so stick around. You won't want to miss any of it. But yeah, that's all for today. Peace out.